Oh, hey everybody. Welcome to Just Make Art. We're excited to be here with you today. This podcast is a conversation about making art and the artist's journey with myself, Ty Nathan Clark, and my good friend, Nathan Terborg. And we're just two artists trying to navigate the art world just like you. And we're excited to bring you some new quotes to discuss today. And really excited.
Yeah, this is one we've been talking about for a little while, and I'm really excited about this. So we're going to start off. We got a couple quotes from a couple of artists of different types to share today, but this is from a Rilke quote that, I'm just going to read it and we'll jump off from there. So this is from letter one. This is from Letters to a Young Poet, and this is the very first correspondence or his reply to Franz Kappa, the young 19-year-old student who was seeking advice from Rilke. You ask in that letter if your poetry is good. You ask me. You've already asked other people. You send in your poems to magazines. You compare them to other poems. You are upset when this or that editor rejects your efforts. So now, since you've asked for my advice, here is what I want you to do. Stop all that. You are looking outward, and that, more than anything, is what you should not be doing. No one can help you or give you advice. No one. The only thing to do is go into yourself. Ty, let's talk about it.
Yeah, this is, wow. Taking into context the fact that Rilke is taking the time to write 10 letters back to a young poet who went to the same military academy that he did. So they had some things in common and, a lot in common, right? So that decision of, do I continue on in the military as a career, right? Do I continue on this career, or do I jump full force into being a poet or to being an artist, what we will discuss more. And this, when you look at Rilke is one of the most famous poets and novelists from Austria in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And he's really, he's considered a modern mystic, not just a poet and a writer, but also somebody who really believed in and lived a life of solitude as well. He did have friends. He did have close correspondence. And as a poet, there's numerous incredible books that have inspired some of the greatest artists in history as well, from the Book of Hours and the Rose Window, his letters to Cezanne, I highly recommend, where he's actually writing his thoughts on the great master Cezanne's work. And, one of our favorite artists, you and I, Cy Twombly, very influenced by Rilke, and he has verses of Rilke in the majority of his work as well. And man, I'm excited to really just discuss, go inward.
Let me tee you up with something.
And just
let me throw something at you. So this is something that I wrote down, and this is relevant to how you and I initially got to know each other, which was me participating in your mentorship program. So I wanted to talk about something related to the difference between validation, which I think the way I interpret this quote that we're discussing is his encouragement is to stop seeking out external validation. So there's a fine line between seeking out validation, which we can agree is not a healthy way to make great art or to have a healthy self-esteem in the process. But feedback is important, right?
Right.
So I was wondering if you could maybe talk about the difference between validation and feedback. It seems to me it's a pretty fine line, between the two. Yeah. How do we, what's the value or the negative aspect of either, and how do we kind of tell if our motivation for reaching out and asking for input from anything other than ourselves is useful.
Yeah, and there's some contradicting things within this quote that we're reading as well, right? Because here is Rilke giving advice to the young poet, and here he's saying, don't listen to anybody else, just go inward, and what he's really saying, like you said, is, listen, the whole world out there, the art world, is going to be telling you what to do, right? The audience is going to be telling you what they like, what they see. And what he's really saying is, don't go looking for approval. Don't just run out there and throw everything at the wind, which this other young poet was doing. He was sending letters out to other people, and he was getting upset when his work wasn't getting accepted into, literary journals and things like that. And so he's taking all this outside information, and it's becoming resistance within his own work, and it's fighting against the true creative nature that he's going to really find in his own solitude while he's creating. And so, I deal with this on a regular basis with a lot of my mentees and artists that I work with. And it's like, it's so easy to compare and allow that comparison to tell you what you should be creating and how you should create, rather than really spending that time in the studio developing who you are in your work and how you do it, and then put your work out there. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, so I was thinking even in terms of, or whatever, to put this in more modern terms, you think about the immediacy of the modern age. I could make something today and post it and get a lot or none or very little, right?
Right.
Plenty of positive or negative or anything, everything between, a feedback of putting things on, Instagram or wherever it might be. So it's just kind of an interesting, I think, thing to consider too, just how, we're talking about like, they had a mail correspondence, right? Letters.
Right.
And let's just take a moment to appreciate the craft of writing a thoughtful letter. I mean, that was one thing that he restates throughout is I wanted to take time and I wanted to consider, my reply. So there were sometimes weeks or months, in between, correspondence, whereas today it's the DMs and texts. And, I think it's safe to say that, we're not going to see any great works of literature. They're going to come from anybody's, text threads. It's just boom, right? It's immediate, so anyway, I guess my point is, what advice would you give, or how do we navigate that? Like, there is something to be said for sharing our work and putting it out there, and but how do we sort of defend ourselves against the downside of seeking validation or what we may perceive as being negative feedback?
Yeah, I mean, it's just undue pressure. I mean, there's just so much pressure today to perform and look good because of that immediacy of social media, the Instagram. I mean, I'm at fault for it. I put undue pressure on myself because of it, like in every resting moment, what artist isn't scrolling through Instagram today? You know what I mean? And it's like, why? Well, you're looking at work. You know what I mean? You're looking at who's doing what are they doing? What artists, are doing something new? What's something exciting? Oh, but then the problem is you get caught up while you're doing that and starting to compare yourself. Right. And you start looking at, oh man, why is she getting so many accolades right now? Oh, how did he pass me? Wow, her work is growing so fast. And then all of a sudden you start turning inward, right? And you're allowing all that pressure to go, you suck, you're not good enough, you don't have the education, you don't have the skills, you don't understand medium, you look too much like X or Y or Z. And so all of a sudden, instead of just using that for inspiration and to drive your passion, you're now allowing all that outside influence to take you away from your studio, right? Rather than allowing yourself to push into the studio.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suspect we'll probably spend a whole, episode on this at some point, but, that Teddy Roosevelt, quote of, comparison, I just had to fact check myself. It was indeed Teddy that said that, but comparison is the thief of joy, Yeah. And I've certainly experienced that where I'm at the peak of having just made something that I feel represented what I was trying to say or what I was trying to do, with a particular piece. And then, just the natural human tendency to see, oh, well, so-and-so got so many, whatever the metric is, likes, followers, shows, et cetera, but it's very true how toxic comparison, can be. So I'm taking us off on a tangent that we don't need to spend time on, but I think it's worth camping on a little bit. What else, when you kind of unpack this, what else really jumps out to you?
Well, I think, just piggybacking on what we just talked about, there's a danger of showing too much like today, because, you look way back into like Rilke's time or even the early Picasso's time, Miro's time, even from the Impressionists and Burt Madet, a highly regarded female impressionist that most people don't know about that influenced the majority of the big, the big names that we know, Degas and Monet and Manet. And so it's like they didn't have the ability to share all their work. You know what I mean? Like an art dealer or a salon dealer or somebody saw the work they liked and they grabbed that. Then the world didn't see anything else. They just saw what was selected and put out there. There's hundreds of other paintings that never get seen. Well, today there's this pressure of, I got to show everything. I have to keep up with the algorithm. I got to keep posting work or I'm going to get lost in the shuffle. And so what happens is you have, immature artwork that is constantly being thrown out to the world, because this pressure of, I've got to just get a new painting up. I got to show it, and I fall into that same, failure of showing too much. I got a lot of really crappy work I've posted in the last few years that I've gone back and taken down and gotten rid of from my feed. And like, why in the world did I share? I shared that because of pressure, not because I was truly confident in the work itself, and that can be a disservice to an artist, right? You make a stronger body of work and then you post a lot of weak work around it. And the art world does look at Instagram. Curators, art dealers, gallery owners, the art world does look at Instagram, and it's like when we're guided by the pressure of what we see around us and we're comparing so much, we feel like we have to keep up, but maybe we don't need to.
Yeah.
Maybe we can be really intelligent in how we share and how we process and do those things.
And I think it's important to highlight, like you said, I mean, this is, the pot calling the kettle black. Is that the saying, right? I mean, we both post, daily or almost daily, because there is that, it's certainly not a responsibility, but pressure. I mean, there's two sides of that coin though, too, right? I mean, like we're in that time, getting seen, required a number of, filters and, layers of approval from, whoever was the governing body at the time. Now that filter, or those, whatever checkpoints or gates are a lot, fewer and farther between. So it's incumbent upon us to decide, what we do or don't want to show, so as the less experienced, far less experienced of the two of us, still, early in deciding, what I share, what I don't share, and what I, how much stock I put in the feedback that I do or don't get. Maybe could you talk about the other side of the coin, right? There is value to getting feedback, to getting advice, to, how things do or don't land. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, Jerry Saltz, talks about this quite a bit. Like you can't just sit back in your studio and create work all the time. Yeah. You eventually have to put it out there. Right. And so, there is that other side of the coin where you have to put your work out there to see how people respond to it. Right. But at the end of the day, what Rilke is telling the young poet is, don't let all that feedback influence you or change you. Right. Yep. Because it can 100% change us for the negative side of that. Right. And we all have trolls. In the art world, people either love it or hate it. There's really no in between. So it's like, you're going to get people that don't like it. You're going to get people that thumbs down it. You know what I mean? YouTube. I get YouTube comments on a regular basis, right? That are, my child could do that. You're terrible. Why are you making wallpaper? There's better wallpaper at Bed Bath & Beyond than your work. I'll just buy that. So, you're going to get those, and those things can, you know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, man, listen, we know the stories of celebrities where social media has we have social media influence, mecca, in history for the first time, and people are taking their lives because of the pressure, right, of this. And it's like, you can allow it to inspire you and you can take grains of salt from what is coming in. But don't let it affect you in a way that just discourages your work. And like Rilke says, the only thing to do is go into yourself. We have to spend that time on ourselves as well, and thinking and learning and studying and looking at our work and just being with our work and, put it out there, take things with a grain of salt, but listen to your artist friends more than you do just the audience.
Yeah, that's huge. Well, that's a perfect segue probably into introducing, the other quote that I think dovetails really nicely into this. As we were preparing for this, we are both massive fans of Clyfford Still, and you just recently was that your first visit, by the way, to the Clyfford?
Yeah, my first visit to the.
Yeah, so my first visit was just this past summer. So, the biggest takeaway or thing that I wrote down when I was watching the documentary from a few years ago, Lifeline, was him saying, "Go inward. What do you have to say?" Which obviously correlates directly to what we're talking about, from the Rilke quote. But I really like that because I think that there's just so much to be said for really considering, and this is something as a young artist who's definitely still just trying to figure things out. Evaluating like, what am I trying to say here? Am I just trying to paint pretty pictures or do something that looks cool? What's in there? What's kind of behind that? So, maybe if you want to talk about your experience, seeing his work or give some more context for him as an artist, that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, for those that don't know Cyifford Still, get online and research. You've seen his work probably, and a lot of people may not even know who he is. But they've seen his work in museums or they've seen it in documentaries, and an American painter. And really one of the leading figures in the first generation of abstract expressionists. He's really credited with laying the groundwork for the movement, as his shift from representational to abstract painting, occurred earlier than Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko, which most people don't know. And he was such, a really not a recluse, but he really kept to himself and family. And even though he was really prior in his work to those guys, he was really good friends with them as well. And Rothko is the one that actually introduced him to Peggy Guggenheim, that really exploded his career in the Art of the Century Gallery in 1946. And later on, he joined Rothko in the Betty Parsons Gallery as well. So one of the few painters who combined color field paintings with gestural action paintings, and you can see that in the work, right? Color field. Barrett Newman, a lot of people say that really kind of took what Clyfford Still was doing and created what we know as, a lot of people call Barrett Newman the godfather of color field painting, but yet Clyfford Still was doing stuff before him in that way. And man, that quote, going inward, Clyfford Still was a master of going inward for sure.
So before I introduce the other element that I kind of want to discuss today, I wanted to ask you, in terms of, going inward, I would just wonder if you could talk about your experience with figuring out, what it is that you had to say, A, and then B, finding a way to say it, with your work.
Yeah, I think, that quote from Still, going inward, what do I have to say, is really something that I've spent a lot of time processing myself and thinking through. And I think it was probably 5 years ago. I had a solo show, and I gave a lecture about the work, and the work was on memory and a lot of childhood memories, and really practicing the art of remembering was the theme for the show. And I was able to just witness the power of an artist talking about his work and watch the faces as they started to grasp what I was trying to do as a poet, an abstract artist. And, I walked away from that show because there were some immense emotions in the audience, and the work connected with everybody because of the story. And I walked away from the show and was thinking, what does my work do when I'm not in the room? How does it speak when I'm not in the room? Because obviously when I'm in the room, they're connecting to the artist and then the work, right?
Yeah.
Rather than connecting to the work and the work alone. And so I really spent a lot of time asking myself, what can I do in my work to ensure that it really tells the story powerfully when I'm not there and I can't explain it, right? Because that's the end goal, right? Is finding out if we want to say something with our work, well, then the work has to say it, right? Yeah. We can't just paint and then hope, right? Like, we're always going to hope, but I put a lot of time and energy and thought in how can I do it? What textures, what mediums, what things can I add to the pieces to create story and to create these things. I sew in a lot of my work. I use cardboard and cloth and extra pieces of canvas and things to like really try to tell stories the way the way Rilke would in a poem. And I think it's just spending a lot of time really thinking through your work, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of just going and working, I feel like there should be a lot of thought, a lot of energy that's put into thinking about the work and how the work is speaking. And that's just something that I've done for myself.
Yeah, I love that. I'm glad you brought up poetry, because that's one of the things I really dig about your process is taking, things that you've written sometimes recently and sometimes, quite some time ago. You did a series where you were revisiting poetry that you had written, 10, 15 years, 20 years previous.
Yeah, that's the series right now, poems from 1995 to 2020.
Yeah. So how do you, whatever, this is just a little tangent here, but I'm just curious. So how do you, as you're making work today with who you are in this moment, do you feel like you're trying to tell a story of a different person because you were a different person then? Or is it sort of like who you are today, your experiences and everything that's led to, your growth and development since then? You know what I mean? I don't know if that's a question or not. But.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it felt like I took out an old VHS tape and put it in the VCR, right? And it went in and the sound, it came on and it's got the V hold is all messed up and memories start to, reoccur. But they existed, but you don't really feel what you're watching yet. But then you get transported back. And I mean, I literally pulled out a stack of, I don't know how many, 60, 70 journals and notebooks full of poems from that time. And I just started reading from 1995 and reading all the poems through. And then I'd mark ones that were good.
Yeah.
There's a lot of horrible, very overly romantic, falling in love poems and things that were really bad and poorly written. Yeah. Which is like our art. When we look 10 years ago and we see our art, we're like, and I selected the ones that really had deep importance. And then I just started painting. So I didn't really go with this poem's going to be this painting. I just kind of started painting these thoughts and ideas. And as work was being developed, that one poem would jump in my head and I'd go, oh, wow, this piece ended up blue with these ripples of canvas folded around it. And the way the marks looked, it reminded me of, 1998, in Ocean Beach, San Diego, talking about Basquiat on the letters where Coronado spelled out in the sand with my buddies. And there was a poem I wrote at that time. Yeah. And then that poem kind of matched, that piece. So a lot of going inward for sure.
And I think that's one of the things, I'm sure we can talk more about this in another episode, but just the value of collecting thoughts and collecting ideas, you're really reviewing little time capsules, of who you were and where you were, what was going on in your life at that moment. I think, one of the things that I found to be real valuable is journaling. I mean, it's just a good habit to be in general as a human being who's always going to have all varieties of random crap and things bouncing around in our heads and our hearts that, we may or may not be aware of or able to process properly. I found that to be the case, certainly for me. So that's, I think, something too that I found to be useful is to, really think about, what I'm trying to say and then write about it. Maybe it's a poem, maybe it's just, random thoughts, Artist Way, Julia Cameron, just dumping style. But either way, there's certainly something to be said for processing that, before trying to, convert it into a visual, communication or conversation.
Well, yeah, we're documentarians of what we do, right? Austin Kleon talks about that in his book, Show Your Work. And it's like, man, journal, take notes. I always encourage other artists, journal the hell out of everything. Why? Like Chuck Close says, inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us go to work. We are going to lack inspiration more times than we're going to have it as artists. So journal and write notes of ideas and, bodies of work, styles of work. So you can always go back in those moments when, I don't believe in writer's block. Like, I know that exists. That means I'm not inspired to create. Nothing's coming out. But I don't believe in it because I've got stacks of journals of ideas and thoughts and memories and poems and all these things that I continue to write, so that in the moments when I can't think of anything, I just go through my journal and they're all labeled. So they're labeled ideas for artwork, for video art, for film, for book, outlines, and I go through and I go, oh, wow, I forgot about that. Okay, let's go ahead and create a body of work on this.
Yeah. Yeah, so you may not be inspired at that moment, but you certainly have been inspired at some point. And because you had the discipline to capture those things, you've got the ability to then convert them, in moments when you need to draw upon them. Yeah.
Yep.
So the other thing I want to talk about, and one of the things that Rilke and Still definitely had in common was their, commitment to isolation, and just frankly being alone. Since we're on Still, I wanted to read something from. This is a book of his work, the late works. But so he wrote this in 1962 after settling in to his place in Maryland. So he wrote, "My setup here has arrived at a point which permits me to relax a bit. The house is comfortable and a big studio is ready to work in any warm day. The isolation has proven reinvigorating to an extent I had not imagined. The fresh air has strengthened the spirit and cleared away tensions that never should have been born." So I really want to focus in on that idea. The isolation has proven reinvigorating. Now, as a hardcore introvert, I'm like, say no more. That my heart sings when I hear, somebody talk about and sing the praises of, solitude and being alone. And I wanted to connect that to something from letter 7, from Letters to a Young Poet. So Rilke wrote, "In your lonely solitude," I like your cover better.
Yeah, it's an old one.
It's prettier. "In your lonely solitude, you mustn't be confused by the fact that something inside you wants to escape it. This very wish, if you use it calmly and deliberately as a tool, will help you extend your solitude over a vast space." Now, so here's I'm going to call myself out a little bit, and then I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. So I have no problem, being alone. In fact, I go to great lengths to try and protect, the time that I get to be by myself, to create or do, pretty much anything else. Where I struggle, and where I really, where this one really hits home for me, is the idea of using that solitude and being in silence, right? So as comfortable as I am with physical isolation, I guess you'd call it mental isolation would be one way of putting it, but, I have a tendency to look to other inputs, right? So having the earbuds in to listen to, good stuff, right? Books, podcasts, music, whatever have you, but anytime I'm putting something in, it means I'm not listening. I'm not sitting in stillness. I'm distracting myself from, being present to whatever is going on. I guess what's your experience with that? Or what are your thoughts on any of the above?
Yeah, man, this is something I talk to my artists. I call them my artists because I love you guys so much. All my men and women all over the world that have been a part of my mentorship program just mean the world to me. But this is something I talk about with them on a regular basis. You gotta find, you're going to be with yourself more than anybody as an artist. You are, period. Like you're going to spend a lot of deep moments of isolation and solitude, especially if you're blessed enough to work as an artist full time and not have, a side job where you're your own patron working another job or you're actually around other people. Most of us have experienced isolation in the pandemic world in the last few years as well. But artists, we're alone. Solitude. We're with ourselves a lot. Most people, to be honest, don't like themselves. You know what I mean? And so there's a lot of healing that also you need to be open to in your isolation as an artist, because when you're creating, what are you doing? You're going into the depths of your soul to make something, right? And it's like you're going to spend a lot of time thinking through things that affect you from your past life, whether parents that told you you're not good enough, siblings who are, a pain in the ass, teachers who are just jerks. You may have experienced serious trauma, addictions, all kinds of things, right? These are all things that, as you read in The War of Art from Stephen Pressfield, these things are not allowed in your studio. These things should not hamper you. These things come up from a different place. The place that you create from is pure. It's your true self. All those other things can get in and completely infect and affect what you're doing and working on in your solitude. I always tell, my mentees, when you open that door to go to create, you leave that stuff outside. They're not allowed in. They're not a part of who you are when you make art, right? It may be part of your art. It may influence what you're doing, whether it's for healing or telling stories to help others, whatever, but those things can affect you. So that solitude, we have to find time to breathe, to be silent, to listen, turn the music off in the studio and sit with your work and just listen and breathe and look. It's so, so important, not only for yourself, but just for the process of making art and listening to the art.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to read, I love that. I wanted to read the rest of that quote. With I'm leaving a couple sentences out in between, but this is a continuation of what I just read a moment ago. There is not much we know for sure, but one certainty that will never abandon us is that we must remain with what is difficult. It is good to be alone because being alone is hard. The fact that something is hard is one more reason for us to do it. Yeah, I think just, kind of like you said, I mean, something that you just shared that really, resonates as well is just, the importance of listening. If we're talking, if we're, allowing other inputs to distract us, then it means that we're not listening, to really what's going on, and it's going to be really difficult to communicate anything, intentionally when we don't know what we got going on inside or what it is that we're trying to get out in the first place.
This is advice from us, right? These are things that we've learned from our own experience, right? So anything that I'm saying, I'm not saying this is how to do it. This is what I've learned has really, really worked for me as an artist and has really helped me in the studio. Because sure, there are artists that just go in and make. No thoughts about it. They just have wonderful, wonderful skills to create fantastic art. They just go in and create, but I really do think that the maturation process of an artist is learning to listen and listen to the work and really speak to it and let it speak to you. And I'm telling you, I read a lot of books, and I read a lot of artist journals from the past, and man, they all listen to the work. And they spend a lot of time, male and female, across the board, every country, every culture. You know what I mean? They spent that time breathing and feeling the work and listening to it and letting it speak and really looking, right? It's easy to just go in and paint, right? But that maturation and that growth process for an artist, I truly feel like starts at you're just making. And as you grow, you learn to listen and make, talk and make, listen, look, and art informs you. That's why I always say, go look at art, go to galleries, go to museums, every chance you get. Look. Jerry Salt says, don't just look at the work you like, look at the work you hate.
Yeah.
Ask yourself why you hate it. Like all this time spent looking informs how you listen and how your work will also speak to you. Like that's just growing up, right? And I'm not talking age. I'm talking maturation as an artist. Yeah. That's just growing up. It's learning those things that really help you grow up.
Well, that applies to what you're reading too. It's one thing just to read, and get confirmation of what you already believe to be true. But it's another thing to read things that you maybe don't disagree with or identify. All right, that doesn't disagree, forget about it, whatever. That doesn't resonate with me. Why does that not? It's the same thought process of really evaluating, what connects and what doesn't, and then using that as, potential fuel for, what it is that we want to put out into the world. That's probably a good place to end. You have anything else on this one?
No, I mean, all I want to say, go to Denver, or if you're, if you have a trip to Denver, make sure to go see the Clyfford Still Museum there. It's a fabulous, I was blown away. Yeah. Incredible museum, I love when museums actually have storage open with windows so you can actually look in and see where the work is stored. I mean, it's one of my favorite things. The Broad has the areas where you can actually look in and see, the storage and stuff there in LA. But go to the Still Museum. It's fantastic. Watch Lifeline, the Clyfford Still doc. Absolutely incredible. I just want to share a fun thing is I actually put up a video from when I was at the Still Museum, and one of Clyfford Still's grandchildren sent me a message, and thanked me for putting it up because, I put Beethoven to Clyfford Still's work in the video. And she said, "You honored my grandfather so well. He was a huge Beethoven fan and would have loved seeing this video." And I was just going, what? How? Are you kidding me? How in the world? So I just had to share that because I feel like that's pretty darn cool.
That is super cool. Yeah. And we should actually look and see. I don't know if we saw the same, collection, because there's no other museum like that in existence that has that high of a percentage of, and I don't know what it is. I mean, it's, 70, 80% of all of his finished works.
Yeah.
It's insane
incredible.
that they own, largely because of how, specific he was in his terms and expectations of his work being shown.
We won't give a spoiler away for that. You have to see the doc.
That's right. I love the word distraction. That was one of my favorite quotes. I want my work to be seen without the distraction of other work.
Wow.
But it's something else, to be fair, like that's, when you get to experience it, it's really something else. And definitely if you haven't yet, this book is absolutely fan. I mean, there's dozens of different excerpts that we could talk about and probably will at some point down the road. So, all right, well, that will wrap up for today. And join us next time on Just Make Art.
We'll see ya.